Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Pitt Street Uniting Church as we gather to honour and remember the life of Jane BESTON. Pitt Street Church is not just a building, but it is the home of a living faith community. And it is on behalf of that community that I welcome you today. In our expression of hospitality at Pitt Street, we say to all who come here, wherever you have come from, wherever you are going to, whatever you believe, whatever you do not believe, you are welcome here. I invite all of you who are gathered here to feel at home in this place and to make it yours for the time we share together, remembering Jane and sharing our love and care with her family and friends. Jane was a beloved member of this congregation until 2017, when ill health meant that she had to cease attendance. However, we kept in touch with Jane, and she knew that the Pitt Street community continued to care about her. I was privileged to be Jane's elder and then her pastoral friend for over 20 years. It was Jane's desire that we hold her funeral in this church, as we did her dear daughter Anne, 21 years ago. Anne had also been a committed and loved member of this congregation. Due to the pandemic, we were unable to farewell Jane in this place, but now we can. In this service of thanksgiving for her life. Of course, we miss Jane, especially her family. However, we want this to be a happy occasion, celebrating the person Jane was and giving thanks for her 96 years. Let us now stand as we acknowledge country. We acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet. We pay our respects to them for their care of the land. May we walk gently and respectfully in this place. Please be seated. Let us pray. Loving God, we set ourselves aside in these moments before your presence to honour and remember our friends and family who have gone before us. Today we especially remember your servant Jane and give thanks for her 96 years and for all that she meant to us. May the good memories of our loved ones serve to inspire us to live our lives to the fullest and to be a blessing to others. In your grace and strength we pray. Amen.
Thank you everyone for being here today. This is not the official eulogy, it's just to fill you in a little bit about Mum's last 4 years, which were a little bit different to what we imagined it to be. Today I stand before you 21 years after I stood here to say goodbye to Anne, my sister, Samuel's mum and Mum's daughter. Number 21 is becoming very significant in our lives as Mum died on the 21st of January. Before I say anything further, there are very necessary thank yous to the Reverend Dr. Josephine Inkpin, who is the new minister here, at Pitt Street. She didn't know Mum, but I do thank her very much for allowing us to use this beautiful church today. Peter, the wonderful organist, Lynn, our fabulous singer, Sue and Dawn, and Leslie, who did the beautiful flowers. Thank you. And of course, all of you at Pitt Street Church who have remembered Anne and Mum and been so good to them throughout all these years. I really appreciate it very much. Most important mention of all goes to Meredith Knight, who has worked tirelessly to put all this together. Meredith, you are the epitome of all that is good in a church ministry. And I mean that with all my heart. My family and I thank you beyond measure for all of this today. Could we have a round of applause for Meredith? Meredith was our miracle, I can tell you. Groups here today include children from Mum's Kenzo group. They were in Year 3 together at Kensington Primary School and remained friends for 75 years, and Mum was the last surviving one. Their children are here today to represent their mums. Thank you to the sons and daughters, all of you have come lovingly today to represent your families. There are high school friends here, teaching colleagues, university friends, and their children representing those friends who are no longer here. The Asom family generously donated the flowers that Leslie brought for us to decorate the church. Their mum, Kathy, was a very special lifelong friend, and we thank them. There are students from Sydney Girls High in the 60s taught by Mum, students from Randwick Girls High taught by Mum in the 70s, and the Maroubra mums from Samuel's primary school days. The group met regularly for coffee at Pacific Square all these years since the boys left primary school and of course now are in careers of their own around the age 26, 27 mark. The Maroubra mums were at Gale Road to farewell Mum on her final journey on February the 4th. I thank you and appreciate that so much. I thank the neighbours too for coming and forming a guard of honour outside her home, and as well to my friend Mari Lou who was there, and Sandra, Mum's Randwick Girls High School student. You stood with Samuel, Kylie and me that day. It was incredibly special. Kylie's friends are here, my lifelong friends are here, and my special friends from Kensington Primary School, Melanie being the most, she's not the oldest, but she is my most long-standing friend from Kensington. Our cousins are here, and, Mum's family is here, of course, with grandchildren and great-grandchildren Madison and Aidan. Last but not least, the Compton family, who are like Mum's surrogate family. They will feature prominently today. Norma was Paul's mum and an exceptional friend for Mum for over half a century. They met as my nursery school teacher. Norma ran a nursery school, as it was called in those days, when my grandmother was ill and needed respite. From day 2 after meeting each other and forevermore, they were firm friends. Mum adored Paul as the little boy and the man he grew to be. He was Norma's son. She loved Pauline and Caroline, his sisters, and then equally loved Therese when he married her many years later. She loved their children, their children's partners and their grandchildren, all here today. And they all hold and have held a special place always. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the love, support and offerings made so generously over and over on a daily level, and especially today in advance for what you will do. I must single out a few people who helped restore my spirit, kept my mental health in check and fed my soul on the very darkest of days, these last particularly the last year of 2020, but the last 4 years. It was a very troublesome and perplexing time for those 4 years as Mum was deteriorating in the aspect of the person we knew. Therese and Paul, who came often, fed us endlessly and offered great advice. It is impossible to do it justice here in a few short sentences. During 2020, when I was allowed an hour visit only, Therese every Wednesday had homemade biscuits ready and cut flowers from her garden on the doorstep to be collected for me to take to Mum, and what joy it gave Mum. Mum really liked the idea that there was a letterbox delivery. It was actually a veranda delivery, but in Mum's mind it was always at the letterbox, and she rather liked that analogy. The youngest Compton, Anthea, deserves a special mention, as she came to Mum's home regularly and was such a ray of sunshine and a very calming presence. She was a PhD student during that time, and Mum and I loved hearing about her progress. She went overseas for a very special, well-deserved trip after submitting her thesis. She got her dad, Paul, to make sure that they stopped at Mum's aged care on the way to the airport to say goodbye to Mum. We were so touched, but she is a typical Compton through and through. Oh, and Anthea got a very outstanding PhD result, and her father will happily tell you all about it if you'd like to ask him. Therese and Paul had my family to lunch after the graveside service, and all the Compton children regaled us with wonderful stories of Mum and the babysitting she did for them over the years and time spent with her. It meant a lot to us. Stephanie had driven with a little baby from Nowra to be there, leaving 2 school-age children with her husband to deal with the morning routine. Thank you, Pete, for your contribution to that. Suzanne and Peter, it would be impossible to elaborate here today all you do daily and have done constantly in the past over so many years. My gratitude, as was Mum's, is endless. Mum's life was enriched by your caring in practical ways and heartfelt generosity. Thank you is so inadequate and appreciation is eternal. There is a poem about a man throwing a starfish into the water, and a million more needing help. Another man says, "You can't save them all. Why are you doing that?" Because it matters to each and every one we can save. You truly try to save the million if possible, and you are relentless in your compassion, wisdom and caring. This starfish here says thank you, that you thought I mattered so much and deserved to be looked after so lovingly during this very difficult time. Mari Lou has been my very good friend, and she's going through her own journey with her mum in aged care, but never once did she and her husband Steve hesitate to help me with financial advice, wading through endless paperwork, having me to dinner, texting daily to check I was okay. Mari Lou came to paint a blue wall white at Mum's recently and ended up painting most of the house. I thank her. She helped deliver things here today, and I am forever grateful. Thank you to Heather Reid for her generosity in helping towards the catering today, and Suzanne, Peter and Heather provided my outfit, which would have been highly approved of by Mum. She always liked to choose something really special for me for my birthday, and this would have been what she would have chosen. I had endless offers from so many, many people, dear, dear people, to provide food, do the washing, deliver dinner to me, have coffee, whatever I needed. Thank you for the loving messages through text cards and letters, changing other arrangements to be here today. Kerry and Liz, thank you for always coming to see Mum on every Friday before COVID. She really looked forward to that. I appreciate it, as did Mum. Margaret too came regularly, and Mum not always focused, but Margaret persevered for old time's sake. Roger had a cup of tea with Mum every Tuesday for over 30 years at Gale Road. During COVID, he would arrive every Tuesday at the front door of aged care and hand in a package. Lovely typed letter and photos of his family and travels. The paragraph began, "Well, Jean, I have my cuppa, hope you have yours. Afternoon tea together across the suburbs as you read my letter. I thank him for the joy that gave Mum. She didn't feel forgotten." Tricia in Port Macquarie sent a letter every week. She is Mum's cousin, and Mum's face would light up with so much joy. She didn't even need to read the letter. She just loved having the envelope, knowing it was from Trish. Anne and Bob, Mum's dear cousins. Sorry, I'm just important. Anne, every Thursday before COVID hit, got a train from Campbelltown and then a bus to wherever Mum was. When I arrived at aged care to pick Mum up to take her to lunch with Anne, the nurses would say she's ready and has been very anxious since breakfast because she knows it's Anne's day. She's been telling us since breakfast about it's Anne's day. I have to be ready. I better not have breakfast today because I've got to meet up with my cousin Anne. But Anne came regardless, no matter how unwell she felt, but she just came always, bearing a chocolate, some biscuits, flowers, a lovely warm top for Mum. I can't express how much it meant to Mum. Anne remembered kindnesses from Mum and my auntie and her auntie Ida, my grandmother, from her childhood, and felt that she needed to acknowledge that. I had bought Mum some hankies with days of the week on, and it helped her know what day it was. When I gathered her things up, when we had to vacate the aged care place afterwards, and sorted everything out, only one hanky I could find, and it was the Thursday hanky. Mum's life started on a Friday and ended on a Thursday, and it'll be forever known as Anne Day. You were just such a joy for Mum, and she truly loved Bob too. Thank you both. Mum's whole world was her basket, and I have it here today. It has, I think Kylie's got it there. Kylie, like to hold up the basket. It had her cloth bag in, her combs, her powder puffs and her powder, and it needed to be near her. Above all, her writing paper and stamps. Australia Post has missed Mum very much because over the last year, $1,500 worth of stamps that used to be the yearly average to send all her correspondence out had dropped considerably. So they're not very happy with that. I insisted that that this basket be in reach no matter what during the lockdown times in COVID. TV on, so she had a diversion, but scribbling a word or two on a piece of paper was so important to her. Her deafness had deteriorated and lip reading was non-existent as nurses wore masks, and if they coloured their hair or changed hairstyles, she had no idea who they were. I kept telling her in my little care package notes to her each day, Mum, give a note to the nurses. If you need anything, please. I'm limited in what I'm allowed to send in, but just even write one word. I'll work it out. Day after day, nothing but silence. And it was very, very distressing. When I finally could visit and said, Mum, you didn't send any notes to me. You know, I wanted to know what you needed. I would have delivered. But there they all were, all the notes, from 8 weeks in that first lockdown, which was absolutely torturous for me. And I said, Mum, why didn't you send these for me? She said, in your note, you said give them to the nurses, but I only had carers. I didn't know who the nurses were, so I kept them for you. We take so much for granted, and I learnt a very valuable lesson that day, and I enjoyed reading all my notes from lockdown that night. Mum's journey began 4 years ago with a very bad fall in her backyard in February 2017. Tice's wedding, Tice is here today with his lovely mum, was up north a week later, and Mum wouldn't have missed that wedding for anything, even though the doctor advised with the torn ligaments and her arm in a sling and the pain that was there from that fall. But she insisted on going. Samuel drove her there. Tice is his very special friend. And she was so thrilled she had attended his wedding. By May, she was obviously not well. Long story short, she was in Prince of Wales for 3 weeks, having been diagnosed with a brain tumour. Aged care for respite. Second opinion was sought in November. And then finally, the diagnosis had been correct, but the prognosis at her age was unrealistic to say it would be a quick demise. So we took her home for a year. She had a very bad fall in December of 2018. She went to Prince of Wales, Sydney Hospital, rehab. She had broken her nose very badly, and it was, was very horrifying, really. After being home for 6 weeks, she begged for respite as she felt something was wrong in her head. She just didn't feel she was thinking correctly as she used to. I literally went door knocking and I found Mark Moran out at Little Bay, who were willing, where most aren't, I can assure you, to provide at government prices 63 days of respite for her. She had lovely people there, great carers, and the food was phenomenal. Then she ended up in Prince of Wales. She had many falls, and Prince of Wales, and then rehab again. They then said, you realise she cannot go home again. And she was pretty much confined to a wheelchair with walking, very getting worse and almost non-existent at that time. She had terrifying times, and I used to call it gobbledygoosh, but the doctor called it delirium. Confusion, hallucinations, sensory dementia, paranoia, terror plus. I will be forever grateful that her medication, after having been changed a few times, they finally hit upon the right one, and it was 3 weeks before that terrible first 8-week lockdown came. I thank Cindy from the palliative care team for all her help that she gave. Mum still had the hallucinations and confusion, but they were no longer torturous, and she no longer feared being murdered in her bed at night. Cruelest one of all of lockdowns occurred on December 27th. We had been allowed an hour Christmas Day and Boxing Day only, and she mostly was asleep, but she was very aware on Boxing Day that I was there and knew I would return. My allotted time for the hour was 2:30. I had said, Mum, I will see you tomorrow, 27th of December, 2:30. I had promised her. Then we got that dreadful call to say that lockdown was occurring again, and there was no end in sight. I felt terrible because I had promised I would be there, and she used to say over and over again, I'll see you at 2:30, I'll see you, okay? And the nurses would say as soon as she woke in the morning, she'd ask if it was 2:30 because I was coming. 10 shocking, gruelling days. And it was on the 10th day we were actually rung to say 2 of us could come for an hour. Kylie left work, and it made my head spin how fast she must have driven there to see her nan. Mum had stopped eating and drinking and talking, almost catatonic. Staff gathered to see her reaction as Kylie and I walked down to her room. I think we ran, actually. She looked up and guttural sounds came out of her mouth and tears welled in her eyes at seeing us. Her arms reached out to us. We just hugged her and told her, how much we loved her over and over. Staff cried too, happy to see how she had reacted to us. I am very grateful we had that. And for the next few days, they lifted all lockdown restrictions for us, and we were able to rotate, with me always being there, but Samuel, Anthony, Kylie could come too as the extra person. We didn't get long times, but we got at least daily. I am grateful as we didn't know then, but it was the final 2 weeks of her life. She knew no more lockdowns for her. No more lockdowns, Mum. When I promise I'll be there, I will be there. No more lockdowns. That's all we could do as we had to leave each day. I really felt for others who still had to be without a visitor. Those lift doors would open and expectant faces would be hoping someone was coming for them, but no one ever did because they were still in lockdown, and we had to walk past them to Mum's room, and I felt so so much for them. On the 17th of January, after a very chatty visit, she fell asleep and she slept for the next 3.5 days, never waking. But I sat with her and she was so warm and tucked up in her bed and very peaceful. I am grateful for that and always will be. On the 21st of January, within minutes of her breathing stopping, a little bird sat on the windowsill and stared in with its head tilted. It was just so amazing. It just seemed to know that its presence needed to be there to comfort us. Then it flew away and just sat on the fence opposite. Days after Mum died, my son Jason was rushed to Prince of Wales Hospital by ambulance, very ill and in coronary care. A nurse said that we looked familiar as I sat there with him, but we couldn't find a common link. Then I said, Mum was here 4 years ago in Park's ward, but that's, there's been a lot of nurses and a lot of patients since then. Laura, the nurse, said, Jean, you're Jean's daughter. And I was so astonished. She had just read a letter Mum had given her way back then to thank her for her care. Mum had made an impact and Laura had kept the letter and had read it the day Mum died without even knowing. The next day, I went to buy Jason his salmon as a treat to take it to the hospital. I went to pay and was told a man over there had paid my bill. I was so overwhelmed and very thankful. I ran after him. It was a man named Mark, and I expressed my gratitude. Little signs were being sent, and it was like they were being sent to reassure me I would be okay and that Jason would get better. I miss you, Mum. I miss you very much. You are still a comforting presence, and now it is time for others to speak and talk about the things they want to remember. Thank you.
We will now stand and sing one of Jean's favourite hymns, Come As You Are.
If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. But when I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part, then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three. And the greatest of these is love.
We now invite members of Jean's family and friends to come and speak with us words of remembrance.
Hello everyone. When I first sat down to try and work out what to write, I was like, well, where do you start? 96 years trying to sum up a life. And the first thing I realised is that Nan was a female born in the 20s. And when you stop to think about what that actually means, and then what she did for the rest of her life, is quite amazing. That was the first hurdle. And she had lots and lots of hurdles to get over. First of all, she was the Ducks of Kensington Public School, which then propelled her into Sydney Girls High. And then, of course, then she went on to become a teacher. But before that, she had to go to university. But because she was born blind, and then later on became deaf, that stopped her university degree. Again, being female, that probably gave them great reason. Thank you. Good technician. And so therefore, her mum had to then wait tables for her to go through to university. Again, those obstacles that we all come across in life didn't stop her. Didn't stop her family, didn't stop her mother, didn't stop her. So when I sat down, I thought, okay, well, what are the things that you all know her for? And I thought I'd divide it into what you know her for and what I knew her as. And the first thing that always came to mind was, of course, like most of us, was the letter writing. To this day, we still don't know how many letters she wrote. We guessed the other day, Samuel and I were talking about it, from October to Christmas, leading up to Christmas, I think it's about a week out from Christmas, 47 letters a day. A day. That's 3,760 for those who are counting, right? And then I worked it out, it's about 80 days. And then when you think about who she was writing to, and do you remember the film? A lot of you will remember the film, Around the World in 80 Days. It's exactly what it was. She was writing to people around the world in 80 days. So that in itself was quite amazing. I got my first taste of that letter writing when I went on a European holiday when I was in my 20s. And I'd hate to say it now, it got a little bit embarrassing because I would land in a country and waiting for me was a letter. And so it'd be like, oh yeah, I got a letter. But the tour manager would say, oh, Mr. Carroll, you got a letter. I got mail? Who from? 5 countries later, the bus would turn around and go, you got mail today? And of course I did. And she knew though when one didn't arrive, or she must have mistimed it because it got sent back to her before I got home. But that was the first taste. But of course, Christmas letters were only the taste of it. There was birthdays, announcements, anniversaries, babies, you name it. She wrote letters then. Who got a card? Who got a card with just the hallmark? There was always a note, wasn't there, at the end of it? Always a note. A little anecdote, a little story, a little well-wish. So she loved writing. The other thing too that she loved was, and only matched by her writing, was her love for books and reading. Birthdays. Birthdays and Christmas. What do you buy her? What have you read, Nan? She would give me a list of 20. Right, is there anything you haven't read? Oh, well, I've got this pile over here that I need to get through. Because everyone was the same, right? They'd all buy her a book. But she would devour it. She'd get through and then hand it back to you to read it. And I still have books I have not read because she'd just read so many. So yeah, so that's what we know her as. And I guess what I wanted to just touch on was who I knew her as. And at first it was my nan as a little boy. And obviously I was too young when I first was born. She looked after me for 14 months. My mum was away at Teachers College. And perhaps that just created a bond thereafter. Sorry, Kylie and Jason, I probably was the favourite. You guys kept saying it, I didn't believe it. I do now. But then Samuel came along, so he surpassed me on that one. But the thing that I remember her most was that she was a confidant. She was a lover of history, fellow lover of history, who wanted to take me at the age of 11 around England, Scotland and Wales to travel for 2.5 months. I loved it because I wasn't in school. It was great. I missed school for 2.5 months. But I probably, looking back, learnt more on that trip than I probably ever would have in school, especially around history. But the one thing, and I think we'd all agree, apart from being a great tea lover, is that she was a brilliant listener. She would listen to you. She would ask you questions and listen. And you could talk to her on an array of topics, whether it was current affairs, politics, history, whatever it was. But she always, at the end of the day, wanted to know how you were and wanted to know what you were doing and where you were at in life. It was never really about her. It was always about you. And I think that's what I remember the most, because that was my nan. Thank you.
I first met Jean on the 1st of February 1962, 59 years ago, at Sydney Girls High School. It was the beginning of a new school year and new teachers were being introduced to the students. I noticed that she was by herself, so I went over and introduced myself as a languages teacher. She smiled and said, "Oh, so was I," and that she had just got a transfer from Newcastle High to Sydney High. I remember that day so clearly, even what she wore. It was a beige suit, a beige sort of box-pleated suit, which went so well with her very pretty auburn hair at the time. Jean always looked bandbox fresh. This turned out to be the beginning of an enduring and beautiful friendship. In fact, she was my best friend, often my mentor, and always my soul sister. At the end of 1962, I resigned from Sydney High to go overseas, but we continued to keep in touch via the old-fashioned air letters, remember those? On my return, I had my children, Carol and Stephen, and Jean and Mary and Anne became surrogate grandmother and aunties. From this time on, our lives were inextricably linked, and all three BESTONs spoilt the kids rotten. Didn't you, Mary? In 1967, Jean received a promotion to set up a languages department at Randwick Girls High. She was half a teacher short, so she knew I was getting ready to become employed again, and she offered me a 0.5 position in her department. As Carol, my daughter, was already in preschool, Mary found me a wonderful woman, the mother of a friend of hers, to mind Stephen, who was 18 months old at the time. That began 12 years of a great professional relationship, which lasted until Jean retired at the end of 1978, and I was promoted to her position, keeping it, so to speak, in the family. We organised countless school excursions, French breakfasts, German Reibekuchen, and so much more. And together we worked very hard to instil a love of languages in our students. When she retired, I applied for and got her position as languages head teacher, or languages mistress, as the position was called in those days. And Jean never wandered from that term. It was never head teacher, it was always language mistress. Meanwhile, in our personal lives, we were, as I said before, soul sisters. We had countless holidays together with our families in the Blue Mountains, Central Coast, South Coast, and elsewhere, always relishing the delight to be in our extended family. We instituted barbecues once a year at my place, firstly on Christmas Eve, and then when Kylie, her granddaughter, was nearly born in the middle of the barbecue, weren't you, Kylie? While we were eating our sausages, we made it Boxing Day, and then in the last few years, Australia Day. What a special person she was. She was kind, generous, patient, thoughtful, and touched everyone. She had humour, charm, and an indomitable will. Her life impacted so many via her work in education and across the community. She was an avid reader, as you've already heard, loved English history, as you've already heard, and I've got vivid memories of her and Carol, my daughter, who was aged about 10 at the time, sitting on the lounge in our home, discussing the life and wives of Henry VIII. She was also an ardent royalist, to the delight of my son-in-law, who always called her his favourite fellow royalist and history buff. I won't go on, but it's a testament to her popularity that there are so many of us here today, and so let's celebrate a life well lived.
As you can tell, I'm one of Jean's oldest friends from my wobbly walk. I first knew Jean at Sydney High in the early 60s, same as Margaret,
She was a language teacher, and I was a very fresh out of university English teacher. And in those days, we were all in the one staff room. We weren't separated into subject groups at all. And she was sitting not far from me, and from afar, I admired her tremendously. She was obviously loved by her pupils. She was obviously an inspiring teacher, and she was a wonderful colleague. Then, surprisingly, after a few years at East Hills Girls High School, I went to Randwick, and lo and behold, there was Jean BESTON, this time language mistress. And she was a very, very highly respected member of the Randwick staff. She was such a leader. She wasn't pushy, she wasn't a bully, she didn't dominate. She just seemed, I think, to inspire her staff as well as her pupils. And she was a very, very loyal colleague. She shared an office with the history mistress, Mandy Tuniker, who would love to be here today, but is unfortunately not well enough. They were very different people, and yet they got on wonderfully and shared a lot of secrets, and they had a lot of stories to tell. Jean, as a teacher, had the highest professional standards. She was a role model in every way. Then came, eventually, retirement. It wasn't the end of the story. Began a new era. Little group of us, 5 altogether. Marge Whitehead, who unfortunately is no longer with us, very, very loyal and old friend who also taught at Randwick. Mandy, Heather Reid, who's here today, Jean and I, the 5 of us, we used to meet on a regular basis, at least once a term, for lunch, either at Maroubra, or then we trekked into town, and we'd meet at various, we tried out quite a few various eating places in town, and Jean was the organiser. She was the one who kept us together. Without her, I think we probably wouldn't have bothered. And she was so involved in all the details of our lives. She had this amazing gift, which I think Anthony and Margaret have already alluded to, and of course Mary. She never missed a birthday. She knew all about all the little trivial things, and she cared. She wrote letters, yes. How she found the time, I don't know. And she had such a way with words. They weren't just conventional letters, they were special. She was able to express with great sensitivity, what was on your mind at the time. One of the things I admired about Jen was I actually never heard her say anything negative about anyone else. It was always positive, and she was always encouraging. Another thing is, not only did she write well from a literary point of view, she had the most beautiful handwriting. And when you got a letter from Jean, you didn't have to open it, you knew it was from Jean, from the handwriting. I just have to mention here that she corresponded with my husband Royce, who would love to have been here today but couldn't make it. And she spurred him on to persevere with his writing. So he considers himself a poet and trying to be a novelist. And Jean was always encouraging him, and he's treasured her letters to him, and he owes her a great debt. Jean has made a lasting impact on all our lives, otherwise we wouldn't be here. We thank God for her friendship. We'll never forget her.
Was haben Sie an Wochenende gemacht? That question, asked every Monday, promoted our German language skills, highlighted our weekend activities, and was to herald an interest in our lives that lasted almost 6 decades. I'm Mrs. Beston's Sydney High student, Lynn Moore, and standing with me are Terry Thomas, Christine Wiggins, and Irene Jelinek. It is an honour to present, on behalf of our cohort, this tribute to a wonderful French and German teacher and friend. The words of others not able to be present here today will speak for them. Pauline Erdstein, who first got to know Mrs. Beston in 1962 while learning introductory French, liked her straight away and was inspired to learn. Linda Coombe, in the same class, still remembers the text, Madame Souris, and the kind, caring teacher who led them through it. I think some people over there remember Madame Souris as well. Sandra Russo maintains that at Sydney High we were blessed with great teachers like her, and Betty Derner remembers her as being the best. She also recalls fun in class, but no mucking up. We always wanted to really do our best for Mrs. Beston. A visit to the Darlinghurst restaurant Stuttgarter Hof extended the camaraderie. To walk the corridors of our old school and see the honour boards for the first HSC in 1967, one is struck by the number of Level 1 German awards. Mrs. Beston knocked back a promotion to take us through to that exam. Pauline recalls the family feeling of the small class and the nurturing learning environment created. Irene mentions her patience, her acceptance, her inclusiveness, her calmness, and her warmth. Making a mistake was never an embarrassment in Mrs. Beston's class. She encouraged the weaker students and rewarded the stronger ones. For Terry, the first contact was different. She transferred into second form and picked up German. Terry says the school arranged coaching twice a week at Gale Road, where she met young Mary and Anne, and thanks to Jean's amazing teaching, learned almost a year of German in a month. I, like Terry and a number of others, became a teacher. It was her example I aimed to emulate. However, Mrs. Beston, later in a familiar manner called Jean, became much more than a teacher. She was our friend who took an interest in everything and everyone in our post-school lives. Irene considers it remarkable that she stayed connected with so many of us. I think we're understanding a little bit more about why, actually. Lorraine Coves sums it up stating, "We learnt a language, but also how to be better people." Indeed, Jean's was an example of a well-lived, selfless life. Her raising of Samuel after the passing of her beloved Anne was an inspiration, and we all followed and celebrated his successes as he too graduated from Sydney High. A prefect excelling in languages, French and Latin, but also public speaking, cricket, football, basketball, and water polo, and heading off to uni in physiotherapy and sports science. Sam, we knew all about you, how proud she was of you. Jean's association began with us girls, but eventually extended to our partners, children, and grandchildren. I visited her at Gale Road with my grandson Jack, and took younger grandson Teddy to a catch-up at her favourite Maroubra Junction cafe. Just how did Jean keep tabs on us all? Well, I think you know. Every Christmas and each birthday came a card accompanied by one of those closely written magical letters. Through the ups and downs of life, there was encouragement, support, and understanding. From these letters, we learnt a great deal about each other's families, our lives and careers. What was amazing was how much Jean remembered from the previous correspondence, as others have already said. She loved to write and was most upset when she could no longer do it. So thank you, Mary, for writing on her behalf. My husband Gerard met Jean just a couple of years ago, but felt he already knew her. He had read all those letters. He described her as sharp as a tack. Pauline's husband Leon knew her over more years through his visits from Melbourne with Pauline. Jean was interested in the world around her, kept abreast of current affairs, and engaged in lively discussions with us all about whatever events swirled around at the time. Mary, Samuel, and all Jean's family, you must be so proud of the legacy she has left you, and know that the thoughts are with you, the thoughts of many. Be assured, Jean's memory will burn brightly, and her life's example will continue to influence and inspire her Sydney High girls. Well done.
The speakers before me have all been boasting how they knew Jean for a long, long time back to the early 60s. I'm sorry, girls, I met her in the very early 50s when she brought Mary to my mother's kindergarten. And she became an extraordinarily close friend of my mother despite their 17-year age difference. And so she's always been part of my life. And by the time I was a young adult, I had my own independent friendship with her. Not long after Jean was given 3 months to live because of her brain tumour, a bit of an underestimate because it was another 4 years, but anyway, quite early on, she asked me would I give a eulogy at her funeral because she thought it was imminent. Now, this was a great honour, but it's also a worry, because when you're a child, you know the adults in your life very well, but you know virtually nothing of the story. And as you become an adult, you don't really ask your much older friend to tell you all about their life from the time you were a child. So I was a bit nervous about this eulogy, and eventually when Jean was staying at Mark Moran at Malabar, I asked her could she tell me something about her past life, so I had some of the material that usually goes into a eulogy. She said, "You don't need any of that." She just wanted me to talk about her relationship with friends. But then she actually turned round and told me pretty much her whole life story, her relationships, everything, which I never knew. And I'm still not sure whether she was actually giving me permission to recount this, but I think I'll just stick to talking about her relationship with friends as she requested, because the earlier part of her life that she told me, it's exactly the same story. And I'm now going to repeat some of the things you've already heard. But Jean was always a person totally focused on other people, their needs and concerns, no matter who they were. And it wasn't just us, her family and friends here at this memorial, but everyone who came into her life. I remember many years ago, she used to get a delivery, Mary might remember, I think it was juice, and she no longer needed the juice, maybe he'd left home or whatever, but she didn't want to tell the delivery man not to deliver the juice because he was her delivery man. She was responsible for him. And at each of the 3 aged care facilities she was at, she would go to no end of trouble learning the names of all the staff and always calling them by their names. even when they were tricky international names, and by the time she was at Bupa at Queen's Park, she was struggling to stay grounded in reality. And someone's already mentioned the coffee shop at Pacific Square and all the other shops where Jean developed a personal relationship with staff. And of course the cards and the tens of thousands of dollars. There was a card for every event, every anniversary that was in any way significant, or even when it was quite insignificant. And it's already been mentioned, she stayed friends with the girls she met in third class until they all died off. But her friendship with the mothers group at Maroubra Primary School when Samuel was there, you need to realise that Jean was not old enough to be the grandmother of the kids in the primary school. She was old enough to be the grandmother of the other mothers, but yet she continued that friendship for years and years afterwards. When I became engaged to Therese, Jean was pretty much the first person outside my family to welcome her, and with none of these questions, who's this person Paul marrying, no second guessing or assessment of Therese, that I had asked Therese to marry me was all Jean needed to know to love her from there on. And when every one of our 7 children was born, Jean was at the hospital within 24 hours with a card and a photo album with the baby's name embossed on the front. As my mother got older and we moved to live with her, she was our default babysitter. But I had an opera subscription for 3 people, so about once a month, my mother went to the opera with us, and for about 20 years, Jean was our opera babysitter. It was always the highlight of the month for the kids. She would bring them a lolly bag, and since it was on a Friday night, she would let them watch Golden Girls. For those of you remember. I've got no idea why Golden Girls was the favoured show, but that was what they watched. She treated them as important little people in their own right. And once when Justin was about 3 and we were down at Gale Road, Anthony had a new bike and it was there, and Justin fell madly in love with it. Within days, a bike turned up for him.